Welcome to Dispatches from a Desperate Time, a partnership with the Quarantine Times and the Public Media Institute. I'm Paul Durica, the increasingly disheveled Director of Exhibitions at the Newberry Library, and for the past couple of months, while working from home, I've been reading through issues of the Chicago Tribune and the Chicago Daily Defender, covering the period from September through December 1918 to explore the impact the Spanish influenza epidemic had on the lives of everyday Chicagoans. In this video, we're going to look at one legacy of that epidemic, the ban on smoking on public transportation. Say you're a Chicagoan in 1918. You could get on a streetcar and go to the front platform and light up. Or if you were riding on one of the elevated train car lines, you could find a specially designated smoking car and smoke up there. But in September 1918, the Spanish influenza virus arrived in Chicago, and the city public health commissioner, Dr. John Dill Robertson, saw an opportunity to ban smoking on public transportation. Thinking was that if you didn't smoke, you would cough less, spit less, and lessen the spread of the influenza. Also, you could open up those specially designated smoking cars to the general public, promoting what today we call social distancing. When the crisis receded, the ban stayed in place, and you would occasionally get a letter to an editor from some guy who missed the time when he could smoke and spit and cough wherever he pleased. But the 1920s was a period of changing social mores. In January of 1920, prohibition became the law of the land, and in the speakeasies and beer parlors across Chicago, men mixed increasingly more with women, and these women were doing like what the men were doing. They were drinking and then smoking, and this led to articles like Women Everywhere from the early 1930s, in which the author laments that he can no longer go to a wrestling match without rubbing elbows with some cigarette-smoking lady. He also goes on to reminisce nostalgically about a point in time when there were smoking cars on trains and when the streetcars had platforms full of men and men alone, all spitting and smoking and coughing and what have you. Also, smoking was still viewed as not being particularly ladylike, and this was used as one of the justifications for the ban staying in place after the Spanish influenza crisis receded. And if women were smoking now, why keep the ban in place? After all, people are smoking in other public places like restaurants and bars at this point in time. So while these debates would continue through the 30s and 1940s about who should be smoking, where they should be smoking, when it's appropriate to smoke, and so forth, there are other changes kind of going on. In 1947, the Chicago Transit Authority forms, and this basically brings under one agency the remaining streetcar lines, the elevated train car lines, and a brand new fleet of buses. But there's a loophole in the ban on smoking. It does not pertain to this new fleet of buses. And so throughout the 1950s, you see people writing into the Tribune complaining about passengers smoking on the bus. More problematically, you see articles about bus drivers themselves smoking their cigars and pipes and cigarettes while driving along their routes. It makes sense. It's a very stressful job. In the mid-1950s, a push is made in the city council to enact a ban across all forms of public transportation. When this is ultimately put in place, it comes with a $5 fine. And in 1956, the first Chicagoan to receive such a fine is a gentleman by the name of Reuben Thomas. That's right, Reuben, I'm calling you out more than half a century later for violating the ban on smoking. Oddly enough, the $5 fine that Reuben had to pay back in 1956 is still what the fine is in 1975. Understandably, it's not much of a deterrent. People continue to smoke on public transportation. It's also not really enforced all that much. So in the mid-1970s, a move emerges to increase the fine to $300. But people continue to be scofflaws, as they often are, and this sometimes leads drivers to take matters into their own hands. In this article from 1976, a driver by the name of Charles Carrington, tiring of telling people not to smoke, decided to get playful and fun with it. And so he would have various kind of witty sayings that he would announce over the PA system. And eventually a passenger who enjoyed them decided to give him a poem. And he would read this as he drove along his route. So while on this train, I say to you, tobacco we don't smoke or chew. We'll enjoy the ride much more if no one expectorates on the floor. Now, in the original draft from the passenger, it said if no one spits on the floor, but Charles thought that was a little crude and changed it to expectorates, which I myself consider an improvement. I hope you enjoyed this look at an unlikely legacy of the Spanish influenza pandemic on the lives of everyday Chicagoans. The smoking ban remains in place, and of course you can't smoke in bars and restaurants anymore as well. We don't know yet how our lives are going to be changed on an everyday basis by the coronavirus pandemic. But we know that we're in this all together. So with that in mind, I'm wishing you well, I'm wishing you to be safe, and I'm wishing you goodbye.